Please begin.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the launch of All Our Talent, Women on Boards and Commissions. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll share findings from a new report that looks at the state of gender representation on boards and commissions locally. We're honored and excited to have two very special guests joining us today. First partner, Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, and Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. We'll hear from both of these thought leaders very shortly, and then we'll have a panel discussion with local leaders on some of the key topics driving this initiative. And we'll also be sure to answer your questions, so please share them with us via the Q&A during our program. One of our main responsibilities as a chamber is ensuring our workforce has what it needs to be successful, that businesses have what they need to thrive. An important part of that is looking at who is leading our companies and organizations and making sure our leadership is diverse and gender balanced. COVID-19 has challenged us to reimagine how we live and work. And the movement to dismantle systemic racism in our country includes ensuring our workplaces are equitable and inclusive. We know that organizations perform better and are more successful and have a competitive advantage when they're driven by a diverse and gender balanced leadership. Credit Suisse conducted a 6-year global research study showing that women on boards improve business performances for key metrics, including stock performance. In the study, companies with women directors on their boards outperformed shares of comparable businesses with all male boards by 26%. And a 2016 study by Morgan Stanley Capital International found that American companies with 3 or more female directors reported earnings that were 45% higher than those companies with no directors. But it's not purely about economic success. Companies are also more innovative and nimble when more women and men are leading together. Varied perspectives, experiences, and backgrounds bring a more robust discussion and enhanced decision making. In today's business climate, this is especially critical as resiliency and innovation are paramount. The success of this initiative depends on the active participation from our business community and women across San Diego who would like to serve on a board or commission. We have an interest form on our website now where you can sign up to be part of this initiative. Visit sdchamber.org/allourtalent and complete the form on that page, and we'll be in touch with you. This program would not be possible without the support of sponsors. I'd like to thank SDG&E and Bank of America for their commitment to this project. We have the opportunity to make a very important or very positive impact on our region with this initiative, and I can't think of anyone better to help us do that than Chamber Board Chair Caroline Wynn, who I'm also happy to share was named Chief Executive Officer of SDG&E this morning. Congratulations, Caroline. Caroline has embraced this initiative from the start and has lent her own expertise and experience to our effort. Thank you, Caroline, for your support, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry, for the kind words, and good morning, everyone. You know, it's truly an honor to be in the company of so many distinguished guests and leaders. First partner, Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, and Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis, thank you so much for joining us here today. You know, as someone who has been a longtime advocate for diversity and inclusion, I am so excited about the work ahead of us to increase gender diversity on our local boards and commissions across all of the sectors of our community. You know, these are really unprecedented times that we live in, and it makes it crystal clear that diversity initiatives of all kinds are really needed to help create a more just and equitable society. You know, both the COVID-19 pandemic and the worldwide protest over racial injustice have really brought to the forefront a new sense of urgency to tackle entrenched social injustice in our society. And I think, you know, one way that I could personally contribute towards creating a better world is by helping lead the All Our Talent initiative. And I feel really strongly about the need to cultivate and encourage women to take on more leadership roles. So today, you know, the makeup of the leadership of boards and commissions in the corporate, in the nonprofit, and in the public sectors it doesn't reflect the amazingly diverse talents that we have right here in our community. And what that means is that we're not maximizing the human capital that we have locally to drive economic growth, for social progress, and the quality of life improvements. The makeup of board leadership is so important because boards set the tone for an organization. They're providing the overall vision and the direction, and they make really important decisions about how to address issues, including matters such as diversity and inclusion. And I think historically, women and people of color have been underrepresented in leadership roles across sectors, across industries, and also in government. Nationally, women represent 20% of companies' board of directors and about a quarter of the C-suite positions. And I believe it's really just important that we pay attention to this disparity and we take action to ensure that diverse voices are at the table, leading local businesses, leading nonprofit organizations, and government. And I think that I know there's a significant body of research that shows that companies and organizations, as Jerry said, that have gender diverse boards, they perform better financially, and they have a competitive advantage. And I think that research also shows that there's a positive correlation between gender diverse boards and a company's social responsibility and their environmental sustainability. In our everyday life, I think we all know people who don't think like us, or maybe they don't look like us. They've had a different life experience than us, and they bring their professional experiences and they bring fresh ideas and perspectives to the table and to our conversations. I believe that they help us see our blind spots and they challenge our assumptions. And while that could be uncomfortable at times, I believe that diverse voices ultimately help drive innovation and better outcomes, and not to mention a richer life experience for everyone involved. So, I'd like to take a few minutes and explain the vision behind the Women on Boards Commissions initiative. And really, there are two key components to it. The first one is taking stock where the San Diego community stands in terms of gender diversity on local boards and commissions. And the second piece is based on those findings, how do we develop solutions to support women interested in serving? And I really believe that the report that was released today provides the first of its kind of snapshot on leadership on company boards, on nonprofit boards, and government commissions right here in our regions, so that we have a baseline, we know where we're starting from. And the report outlines some initial solutions, and we have more work ahead of us. But so this is really the kickoff. And I just really encourage everyone to if you get a chance, to read the reporting and consider the steps that you and your organizations can take to expand opportunities for women to lead. And Jessica Grounds, co-founder of Mind the Gap, she's our partner in this effort, and she'll talk more in detail about the findings a little bit later. But in conducting the research for the report, Jessica shared with me that it was clear that our region really has the talent and the resources to not only be a state leader, but to be a national leader. And that is super exciting in having gender diverse boards and commissions. And she also noticed that there's an eagerness among San Diegans to really work together and lead by example. And you know what, I'm very optimistic, not just because of what Jessica's observed, but also because my own experience living here and working here in the region over the past few decades, I see it and I feel it. San Diego to me is one of the most diverse, dynamic, and really innovative regions in the world. I think the local talent pool here is wide and it's deep. We have progressive companies and organizations that I think already have taken some great steps to diversify their leadership. And we have many male leaders who have stepped up and served as mentors for women and championing women leaders. And the many women leaders who make it to a priority to coach the younger generation coming up through the ranks, which is so important. And this is really how change is made, I believe, one person at a time, one organization at a time. When I started SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, as an associate engineer right out of school in the late 80s, and rose up through the ranks to where I am today, it's because of the support that I receive from both male and female mentors along the way. And I feel very blessed to have had that have mentors by my side and in my ear providing me guidance along the way. And today I'm proud to now lead SDG&E. You know, today women make up 42% of the management employees at SDG&E, and half of our workforce are people of color. So that is very important to be a role model that way. And you know, many of the women leaders that we have in our company are actively involved in the hashtag Be That Girl initiative. And this was really an initiative, something I launched several years ago, to mobilize women professionals at SDG&E to serve as mentors to inspire young girls to pursue careers in STEM and science and technology and engineering and math. And you know, I'm proud to say that we have male professionals at SDG&E that are part of that as well, and who are just as passionate as I am about the hashtag Be That Girl initiative and really taking part of that. So, you know, if the excitement that I see on both sides of the mentee and the mentor side of the equation are any indication of our region's potential, the future is really bright. You know, now let me just pivot, and I'm so pleased to introduce our next speaker, and I'm pleased to introduce the first partner of California, Jennifer Siebel-Newson. She is an award-winning filmmaker. She's an advocate and a founder of the nonprofit, The Representation Project. Using film and media as catalysts for cultural transformation, the organization inspires individuals and communities to challenge and overcome gender stereotypes and limiting gender norms. You know, the first partner also wrote, directed, and produced the award-winning documentary film Misrepresentation, which exposes how the misrepresentation of women in the media contributes to the underrepresentation of women in positions of power and influence. And you know what, I can go on for a really long time and talk about all of her accomplishments and her extensive work, but I'm really pleased to present you Jennifer. Jennifer, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you, Jerry, for instigating this report. It's incredibly important that men in leadership use their positions of power to shine a spotlight on how unequally power is distributed. So thank you for being a true ally, one who isn't just doing this because you're a nice guy, right? And as the former mayor of San Diego, you know the well-being of an entire community rests on the well-being of women and girls. Women make up half our workforce, and most American families depend on women's salaries to keep the lights on and put food on the table. So anyone who cares about their community is going to make sure that women are thriving, have access to good jobs, get equal pay for their labor, and respect for their unpaid labor as their family's main caregivers too. That's great leadership, and we know it's just good government. And Jerry and Caroline, as the leaders of your business community, I want to thank you because you know how important women are to a company's bottom line. As Jerry rightly said, a 2017 study by Morgan Stanley Capital International found that United States companies with 3 or more female directors reported earnings per share that were 45% higher than those companies with no female directors. And a 2012 Berkeley study found that companies with women on their boards are more likely to create a sustainable future by instituting strong governance structures with a high level of transparency, among many other things. And that's why investors are insisting companies have women on their boards. After research indicated superior market performance where women had at least 2 seats on a board, BlackRock recommends at least 2 women directors serve on boards of companies in which it invests. And then we know that this year, actually at the very beginning of the year, Goldman Sachs announced that it will not take a company public unless it has 1 woman on its board. So it makes perfect sense that as an organization dedicated to the success of the region's business community, you are promoting awareness around women's representation on boards. And at the Chamber of Commerce, you know that companies measure and track what is most important to them. And in producing this report, you're demonstrating what is important to you. I applaud your efforts and hope other California cities and counties will follow your example. Earlier this year, I actually helped launch the California Partners Project, and we're doing statewide what you've started to do in San Diego. we're tracking the progress of California's 660 public companies in meeting the requirement of the law passed by Senator Hannah Beth Jackson in 2018 that public companies with boards of 6 or more directors have at least 3 women directors on their boards. Because we know how important this issue is, we're going to measure it and make sure that our companies, shareholders, employees, and consumers know that our businesses are tapping into all the talent that is available to them in California. And we will help them find that talent if they need help, just like you're planning to do here in San Diego. Now, the data you're releasing shows that San Diego has quite a bit of work to do to achieve gender equality, but you can't measure how far you have to go until you know where you're starting from. So as you've done, you can't hold yourself accountable without data. So I really commend you for taking this first step. In the 18 months since Senator Hannah Beth Jackson's law required California public companies to have women on their boards, we actually estimate a couple hundred women have actually been added to corporate boards in the state, which is great news. Now, 96% of our companies statewide have at least one woman on their boards. In the third quarter of 2018, California actually ranked 29th among all US states in terms of percentage of female board members, which was 17%. California actually jumped to 16th position by the end of 2019, with 23% of directorships held by women. That was a big jump in just over a year, and San Diego can make that same kind of progress in the region, which ultimately will benefit the state. My focus on gender equality in corporate leadership was developed through my first calling as a documentary filmmaker. My films focused on gender norms and how, when challenged, they can positively impact both boys and girls and men and women. My first film, Misrepresentation, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and sold to Oprah Winfrey Network in 2011. And right away, I realized that I was tapping into something big. That same year, I founded the Representation Project with a mission to transform culture by shifting the public's attitude and behaviors around limiting gender norms through the use of these documentary films and our ongoing education and activism. We give voice to the next generation of change agents and provide tools to the adults in their lives to empower them along their journeys. Because I'm a firm believer that if you can see it, you can be it. In other words, you can live your whole life seeing things a certain way, being told things have to be done that way, until you see another way of doing things or thinking, and suddenly anything is possible. And as a native Californian, I believe in my core that the greatness of this state is in breaking out of old ways of thinking. The idea that some people, based on their gender or the color of their skin or where they grew up, make better leaders is an old way of thinking. My husband likes to say that California is where the future happens first. So I want to thank you all for being the first city to focus like this on women's representation in board leadership. I'm so proud of all of you, and together we will make what's happening here the future of the state and the nation. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce a true California advocate for women, showing exactly what the future of female leaders look like, my good friend, Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis.
Well, thank you very much, First Partner Jennifer Newsom. It is so wonderful to see you. It's been too long with everyone in quarantine.
I know.
And it's just fantastic that the San Diego Chamber has taken this on, not just for San Diego, for everyone in California and for people across the country. I am, as the first partner said, a true believer in gender equity and in gender parity and reaching gender parity. I'm very proud, and I will say now that it's all over, that the first partner walked around with Eleni for Lieutenant Governor pins, even though the recommendation was that she stay out of the race for her husband's successor. But she did it unabashedly, and as someone who has proven again and again her dedication to women and to gender parity. But as it happened, I did become the first woman ever elected lieutenant governor in California. I'm very proud of it, and I'm very proud that I am able to speak about the importance of gender equity with this platform. Prior to this job, I served as a United States ambassador, and I served during a time when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. And I'm very proud of that and proud to consider the secretary is a mentor of mine. And so whenever I talk about gender equity, I always like to first draw back the lens and look at it from a global perspective. And the secretary instituted many changes in the State Department for how foreign policy would look at the problems confronting the United States in terms of our national security and our interests in the world through the lens of how women are doing in the world. And she would say all the time that if you want to know how a country is doing, look at how the women are doing. And this was an evolution because, as many of us remember, she was the first to stand up and say that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights once and for all. And for a long time, and we too continue to this day, we think about women's rights through a human rights lens, justice, equality. And that is important. We have to continue to do that. But what I think that we've already heard just in the beginning of these presentations, Jerry, you and Jessica have already outlined so much here, is that there are other arguments as to why equity and equal representation is important for the well-being of institutions. And so when I think about this through the what the secretary used to say, that if you want to know how a country is doing, look at how women are doing. I want to add a piece of evidence to this conversation for all of your reference. That is data that has been collected now for many years through the World Economic Forum. They look country by country at several areas, including health, education, economic participation, and political participation. And they rate how well women are doing in reaching equality. And what they have now found definitively is that the higher the score, the better and the closer to parity women have in these countries, the higher the GDP of that country. So the correlation exists already, we know, globally at the highest level. Now from there, diving down into the state of California, I'd like to just talk a little bit about the advances that we've made and how far we've come, but still how far we have left to go. So it is right now the very first time in California history that of the 8 constitutional officers, 3 are women. That's Betty Yee, Fiona Ma, and myself. Never before have we had 3 women serving out of the 8 at the same time. So this is great. It's even better if you add in the fact that our 2 other statewide elected officers, our 2 senators, are also women, which brings the total of statewide elected officials, 10 of them, half are now women. First time ever, very significant, and something I think we should all be proud of. When you look at the legislature, the numbers are not quite as good, but again, it presents a call to action. We now have about 1/3 of the members of the California legislature who are women. Now, the fact is that we have been at this rate in the past. It has actually gone down, and now it has come back up to about 1/3. That puts California 21st in the nation in terms of gender parity in our legislature. So we have much more work to do. And I would consider that, and I hope that you consider that, a call to action as well. And then in terms of what it means to have more women in elected office, well, we can see that by the legislation that has been moving forward out of the California legislature, and I will also attribute this to our governor, who considers himself a feminist and who has a first partner who's extremely engaged in these issues and in the details of actual legislation that comes before the governor, that we are moving legislation forward, including Hannah Beth Jackson's bill that the governor signed, in which the first partner talked about, which has to do with representation of women on California boards. It is tied up in legislation that has not deterred the leadership of this state, including the first partner, in pushing for the adoption of policies within private companies to require that there are women on boards. Now, in some ways, this work is happening very quickly. In some ways, it's not happening quickly enough, because if we're still just talking about one woman or maybe two women on boards that have 8, 10, 12 members, we're still not getting to the critical mass of women that leads to real change. Studies have shown definitively that it is only when you have at least 1/3 of women in the leadership of organizations that real change takes place. So I would like to actually end with an anecdote of something that I think is important that we acknowledge as we talk about all of our advances, as we talk about our progress, as we talk about the stories that inspire us. I think it's also to recognize that the kind of discrimination that women get in reaching the C-suite is still very real. And I'm a big fan, a big proponent of Lean In. I think if you haven't read Sheryl Sandberg's book, it's very helpful and very inspiring. But there are also things that she writes about that we continue to hear about. And I want to just tell one story. I have a friend who took a job in a technology company. It was one step below what she was qualified for, but the job that she wanted wasn't up. And so when she went through her interview process, she said, okay, look, my dream job, the one I feel I'm qualified for and the one that I want is this job, but you have one just below. I'm willing to take it so long as if the C-suite job opens up, I'll be considered for it. The recruiter and the HR people heard her. She was on the record, and they acknowledged that would happen. A few years later, she'd been working at this company very successfully. All of her reviews were positive. Everybody liked her. By all accounts, she was doing a great job. But the HR director had changed. It was someone new, a young man, significantly younger than her. And she went and sat down with him and reminded him of this agreement that she had when she took the job. And he listened and he listened, and then he paused and he said, look, it's just not going to happen. I'm looking for a real leader to fill this position. What this did to my friend was really, it was really terrible. It was very hurtful. And I'm glad she told me the story, because I think that it helped to lighten the load. The self-doubt that can creep in. Who is he to say whether or not I'm a leader? How subjective the decision-making process really is. But I also tell this story because it had an impact to the company. She left within 6 months of him saying this to her because she couldn't go on in this place that made her feel so devalued. And frankly, she went out and she found another job with a firm that did value her experience, and she got the promotion that she wanted, just not at the company where she really ideally had wanted to be. So I think that kind of sums up what we're talking about here, is that on the one hand, we know that there are still institutional barriers making it very difficult for women to get into the highest levels, to have their talent recognized. And on the other hand, that any company that doesn't recognize that by doing away with this institutional kind of sexism, I think I said racism, excuse me, that's on my mind as well, but institutional sexism, that any company that recognizes it and does away with it and works to make the workplace more equal. We'll actually be better off in not just securing, but in advancing the talent that can do the best job in advancing the goals of the company itself. So thank you all very much for having me, but more importantly, thank you to the San Diego Regional Chamber Foundation for the incredible work that you're doing in this important area.
Thank you, First Partner and Lieutenant Governor. We appreciate that you could join us today, and your words really help us in framing the perspective that we need to move forward. Your support and involvement on this effort brings an awareness to the project that'll help expand our reach and the impact. Now, to get our panel discussion going, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Elizabeth Fitzsimons, Vice President of Leadership and Engagement at the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. Elizabeth?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on mute. Let me start over with thanking Jerry. Thank you. I just want to thank Jerry for his leadership on this initiative. We call this project All Our Talent because we're talking about leveraging all the talent in our community and enrolling all the leaders in our work. And it's really important that men who are leaders are part of this. So thank you, Jerry, for walking the talk. Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to see so many of you in attendance today. Thank you for your interest in and support of this work. At the Chamber and our affiliate Lead San Diego, this project was a natural progression of our work to elevate women in the workforce and address the gender gap in the C-suite and the boardroom. Through Advance, Lead's professional development program for women, we have provided training and mentorship to 200 women leaders across San Diego County. And these women are now ascending through their organizations, taking on new responsibilities, and stepping into community leadership positions. We are committed to seeing more women, especially women of color, in positions of leadership and influence, and this project is part of that commitment. Today, we've brought together a panel of local leaders for discussion of our project findings and where we go from here. We'll take questions from our audience through the questions function and also from our viewers on Facebook Live. This session is being recorded, and so we're going to post the video to the Chamber's YouTube channel, and we'll email a link afterwards to all of the participants so you can share it with your networks. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest this morning. Caroline Wynn, whom you've met earlier this morning, is chair of the Chamber's Board of Directors and Chief Executive Officer for San Diego Gas and Electric. Caroline began her career as a junior engineer and now has over 3 decades of experience in the energy industry. This project is a product of Caroline's role as Chamber Chair and part of Caroline's long-standing record of creating leadership opportunities for women. Bethany Mayer is a member of Sempra's Board of Directors. She is an executive partner with Cirrus Capital Group, LLC. She previously served as Executive Vice President, Corporate Development and Technology of Sempra Energy. Bethany served as the President and CEO of the tech company Ixia, and now serves on the boards of Box Incorporated, Electronics for Imaging Incorporated, LAM Research Corporation, and Marvel Technology Group Limited. Nancy Maldonado is a community advocate with a strong commitment to improving the lives of marginalized communities. She is Chief Executive Officer of the Chicano Federation, which focuses on making impactful changes in the day-to-day lives of San Diego families who want to create a safe, stable life for themselves and opportunities for their children. Roxanne Kimani is a life coach, speaker, facilitator, and leadership development consultant at Kimani Catalyst Consulting. Dr. Kimani is a faculty coach and leadership development consultant at Rise San Diego, a nonprofit focused on elevating and advancing urban leadership. She also teaches as an adjunct professor of leadership at National University and cultural sustainability at Goucher College in Baltimore. And Jessica Grounds is co-founder of Mind the Gap, a company that helps organizations around the world mine and bridge their gender gaps. Mind the Gap is our partner on this project, leading the research that we are discussing today. We're going to start things off with some highlights of the research findings. Jessica, would you please walk us through what you found?
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. It's wonderful to have so many wonderful San Diegans join us and people around the state. And thank you so much to Elizabeth and the whole team here at the Chamber. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm Jessica Grounds. I'm a women's leadership expert and co-founder of Mind the Gap. For most of my career, I was based in Washington, D.C., working on women's leadership, both in politics and in business. And I'm really thrilled to be back to my hometown, helping lead efforts here around women's leadership in this innovative city and state. Before I share some of the findings from our report, I want to acknowledge the importance that the Chamber's intentional support has really meant. In the 2 decades that I've been doing my work, I really have seen a shift to cities taking the lead on workforce issues like gender diversity. And so we're really lucky that we have that support and recognize that the Chamber has that critical influence here. So what's exciting about this project is that we're looking, this is something that encapsulates a number of different sectors. And actually, as the first partner had mentioned, that this is really a timely focus because in 2018, we passed first in the nation legislation to actually require that women serve on public company boards here in California. And so what that means is in the next year and a half, we're going to need to add about 800 women to public company boards, which is an incredible thing. And I realize you didn't see me that whole time. Hi, everyone. So as I mentioned, we're looking at a whole bunch of different areas in terms of board leadership. And so let's look at this. So as we discussed, there's 5 different sectors that this report is looking at. We're looking at public company boards, private company boards, nonprofit boards, and then San Diego City boards and commissions, which is neat that we're, again, in many cases, just looking at one of these sectors. So we're thrilled to kind of see where we stand here in San Diego in these different places. So let me share a little bit about what we found. Here in San Diego, we have 88 public companies, and women represent 23% of board directors here in San Diego. So not great, but that's about a little bit higher than we see in the national average. We have about 20% of women on public company boards around the country. One thing that's really an interesting piece to know in our research is that when we look at critical mass of companies, we often talk about that being 30%. So unless you have about a third of that board makeup looking like one gender, one ethnicity, you really don't have that deep impact. And what we see here in San Diego is only about 18% of companies, public companies here, have that critical mass of 30% women. And so I wanted to mention that much of this research on public company boards is actually shared with us by our good friend Annalisa Barrett. And Annalisa is with KPMG Board Leadership Center, and she's going to be coming out with a report this next month, digging more deeply into San Diego public companies and what our challenges are here in that space. So we really thank her for that work. In terms of our private companies, this is a place in which we have a lot less information. So throughout all of these, all of these different sectors, no one is really required to share their board demographic information, but private companies are really those that are even a little bit more unclear in terms of the numbers. And so private companies, a recent report that was done by Him for Her, Kellogg School of Management and Crunchbase found that with private companies with over $100 million in funding, 60% of those private companies had 0 women on their boards. And in fact, the report found that the women represented about 7% of private company board directors. So we really need to look at that more closely and try to identify where we have more room to grow, of course, very much in the private companies. Our research did find that of the 27 largest companies by revenue here, only 2 of them actually disclosed their board members. And of those 27 companies, 25 of them have male CEOs. So a place in which we really need to understand better kind of what the makeup is of here in San Diego and private companies. We have more room to go knowing what our baseline is. The nonprofit organizations here in San Diego, we looked at 51 of the largest nonprofits here, and we found that women represent 41% of those nonprofit board members. And so, again, this is a little bit lower than what we see in the state. Of course, the nonprofit sector has always attracted more women to its employee base compared to some other industries and other sectors. And so we do have more women in nonprofit organizations. We did highlight, though, that when we look at board chairs, and chairs really decide much of what the efforts are for an organization, much like Caroline Wynn is in terms of her focus on gender diversity here in San Diego as the chair of the chamber, we don't see as many women in the chairmanship roles. And so it's something that we want to think about working on here and addressing, bringing more women into those chair positions. Our last two sectors of the 5, we have city and county boards and commissions. And what's really, I think, neat about looking at these is this is a place where oftentimes we don't think about how your leadership can really, you can bring to light your own ideas and your own thinking. Commissions on the city and the county level are very powerful in terms of dictating planning and water use and police, how the police are working, all of these different elements that really impact our community, and we should bring more gender diversity to these areas. I want to give a shout out to the city board and commissions because they are the only group that's actually proactively tracking gender, race, and ethnicity of their commissioners. And as you can see, they're doing quite well at almost 47% at the city board and commission level. And there are 49 city boards and commissions, which are often appointed by the mayor and the city council. County boards and commissions, we have 105 here in the San Diego County, and women are about 35% of county boards and commissions. So again, places in which we can really provide opportunity for women to learn, to lead, learn, bring their perspective as board members in these great places. So I encourage you to read the report to hear more and learn more about the 5 sectors we studied here in San Diego. Lastly, I want to share, or I should share before I move on, we had 5 gaps and recommendations that came out of our report. And these gaps and recommendations came through many interviews that I had with experts here in San Diego and in the state and in the country around this issue. And so we came up with 5 recommendations that we really see that all our talent project can work to address. I'm going to mention a couple of them, and again, I encourage you to read the report to get more detail, but the first is data and awareness. What we tend to see, again, is we don't collect data. Even for public companies, we are not tracking demographic data of board members. We actually have to identify this by hand by looking at bios of folks. So encouraging organizations and companies to track this information, it helps us to see where we are on gender diversity, where we are on race and ethnicity. As a number of the Lieutenant Governor and the first partner shared so well, we know that women make an impact, and so really helping companies and organizations understand that when more women are at the table, we have more return on our investment, are more nimble, are more innovative, and better positioned for change. And one anecdote I want to mention from my findings is that in the context of COVID, many people mentioned that companies and organizations are turning to women's expertise because many have expertise in crisis management and how workplace systems operate and changing those dynamics under the new realities that we live under COVID, how women can really bring those attributes to the boards. And that's something that organizations and companies are looking to. The second piece I want to highlight is that, as we talked about already, talent exists here, but we need to match the talent to the opportunity and really build strategies so that people who have board opportunities also recognize that that we're bridging the talent to those opportunities. And I think we need to be particularly intentional about women of color and making sure that they are also, of course, key to bringing those opportunities together. And so that is something we need to pay close attention to. And the last piece I'll mention in terms of my recommendations is coalition building. I love being back in San Diego because this city is all about collaboration compared to other places that I've lived and been. And so I really appreciate people wanting to work together. We're doing a lot of efforts in this space, and I think if we're working together as a coalition, we can really amplify and scale initiatives that are already taking place to advance women in board leadership. And so lastly, I'll mention that our next steps is that we are building a database over the summer of talent. This will be released in the fall, and this is really about all of these different areas that we are identifying women who are interested in serving and really connecting them to the opportunities for public boards, private companies, commissions, and nonprofit organizations. In August, we're going to have a Women's Elected Officials Summit. We see that women really are addressing important legislative change around workplace changes, and so we're going to have a great panel this August, and we'll be inviting you to that. And we'll be talking about the strategies into the new year at the end of the year. So I really appreciate all of you being here today and listening. And let's kick it off back to Elizabeth and have our panel discussion.
Thank you, Jessica. With this research, as the Lieutenant Governor pointed out, it's so important to just have this foundation. We now have a clear picture of where we stand. Caroline and Bethany both have a commitment pretty soon, so we're going to start with them. Bethany, as an experienced CEO and corporate board member, can you share with us what you have observed when a woman joins a formerly all-male board or executive team? And also, like, what is your message to women interested in serving on a corporate board?
Well, so I did actually join a company that was an all-male executive team as CEO of Ixia. Ixia was a publicly traded company when I joined it, and unfortunately had been in some difficulty, which seems to be the case often when women end up in a leadership position. Something has happened and a woman needs to step in. And so there are oftentimes women who take these risks, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, but I was fortunate in my case. I was able to, I left HP as a senior vice president running the networking division, which is about a $2.5 billion division, for the CEO of Ixia position, because it was a publicly traded company, and that's a very unusual thing in the technology industry, and it was all male. So being the first female leader and the only female leader at the executive level, I spent time hiring women executives. So I promoted my one of our sales leaders to be head of sales, Patty Key, who was fantastic. I brought in a CMO who was a woman, Marie Hattar, who's now currently the CMO of Site who acquired us. And I also brought in the head of manufacturing, and I promoted another woman in our organization to be the head of our labs, which is the most technical organization in the company. So my goal was, as a CEO, to bring in more women talent, and no one stopped me and no one disagreed with me. They were all very excited about it, so that was great. And I actually had a wonderful team of both men and women who helped me lead the company to a very, very successful growth and sale of the company in 2017. And as a board member, what I would say is I agree with the comment regarding critical mass of women on a board. Both Sempra and Fox, as well as LAM, which are some of the boards that I serve on, have several women on the board. And that critical mass makes a difference in terms of our ability to really change minds and make better outcomes for the company. So it's been a really great experience for me, both as CEO and as a board member, and I very much want to encourage more women to work towards joining boards and move in leadership. And I do quite a bit of mentoring and want to continue to help that.
Caroline, what do you have to add to that? What have your observations been with the critical mass piece?
Let me answer. I think one of the things that stood out to me most about the report that Jessica and Mind the Gap put out was how to inspire the next generation. Because if you think about the next generation being millennials and Generation Z workers and employees, which would be my daughter, they're paying attention to the leadership composition of organizations and that they're considering as possible employers. So I think that just reinforces to me why diversity on boards and in management is really critical to companies' ability to attract top talent and remain competitive. When I think about the company that, of course, I'm most familiar with, the Sempra Energy family of companies, as Bethany said, Sempra has 5 women serving on its board today. And I really think this goes back to looking at the company leaders, so Sempra's CEO, and recognizing that diversity really drives performance, and the whole organization being very intentional on building a more inclusive and high-performing culture. Sempra CEO Jeff Martin signed on to the Paradigm for Parity, which is a coalition of business leaders that are dedicated to addressing the corporate leadership gender gap. And he's also signatory to the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. It's an initiative that more than 500 CEOs have pledged to take really measurable action to cultivate a workforce that where diverse perspectives and experience are both welcome and respected. So I think that that was what stuck out with me most about Jessica's report, and I do think that critical mass is important and something that our companies that we're trying to emulate.
Were there any surprises for you as we worked through this project and the research became available to you, Caroline? Anything that you weren't expecting?
Well, I think one of the things that stood out to me also in Jessica's research was that the challenges that she encountered in getting demographic data on the gender and the racial makeup of boards on private companies. Jessica was only able to identify the board compositions of just 2 of the 27 largest, by revenue private companies that we have in San Diego. And I think this goes back to something that the first partner said and the lieutenant governor said, when you don't have good data, it's really hard to track progress. And so I think that was one of the things, another thing that stood out about Jessica's report.
Dr. Kimani, going back to what Bethany was saying about, looking at the leadership of an organization, right? How can organizations, particularly CEOs, working with their boards, create more gender balanced leadership? What if those organizations have long-standing boards or long-standing executive teams? How do you start to make those changes or those cultural shifts at the leadership level?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question and a very good question to ask. I think about learning and forward thinking organizations, knowing that gender equality isn't just about fairness or being politically correct. It's really about creating, developing, and sustaining smart leadership. And so it's not so much about wanting to fill a quota going, okay, now, in 2020, we need to just bring women on board in order to get to this new way of thinking. This thinking has always been around. I think the difficulty is realizing that many organizations have maintained this belief of a gender neutral environment, and the consequence of thinking about that, falls in line with this notion of no color lines or I don't see color, which really does not create an atmosphere of embracing differences. So when boards and commissions are thinking about who they want to have on their teams, not just on their boards and commissions, but also who are going to be in those leadership positions, you want people who are able to look at issues differently, give probing questions that lead to better decision making. One of the comments that Jessica talked about of the notion of women that people call on women in crisis management, just watching what has happened over this pandemic. Many of my colleagues and friends who are moms have had to now take on many, many more roles, including becoming a teacher, a principal, a school counselor, in addition to trying to get all of their other jobs done. And so we know that women can take on those roles. but I don't want us to just limit it to that. You know, I want us to really think about women bring a completely different dynamic in the way that they show up in spaces, the way that they think about decisions, and what women are able to offer. I also want to make it clear too that when we're talking about women, it's not just women in general, but specifically women of color. We need to be explicit in that this is including and recognizing women of color have a place on those boards and commissions, because we want to be representing the communities that we are trying to serve. People want to be able to see themselves. And so what Caroline was referring to in relation to that, people, when they want to go work for an organization, want to see that information. When I go do my research, I want to be able to see myself in the community that that organization is serving. I want to see myself in the culture and the environment and the team that I'm going to be working with. So I think it's important to think about women bring a different perspective based on their own lived experiences, that we're not just trying to fill a status quo. These perspectives can broaden and deepen the leadership and can make it more equitable. Very important to focus on the equity, not just looking at equality, going to 50-50 division, but really looking at the equity, that we're not just going, okay, we need women on this board and then they're just going to fill a seat. We have a lot of power, we have a lot of confidence, and we have a lot to bring forward. And so in those organizations, they need to be willing and open-minded that their organization is going to shift and change, and it's going to be for the better.
It's really those positions of influence and leadership that we're talking about. Bethany, before you go, what do you think about this moment in our country right now? Do you feel like this is a time when we can be making some sustainable change here?
I do, actually. I think we're moving towards a tipping point here, and maybe we are at the tipping point. It's interesting, just, you know, thinking about the past months and even the past couple of weeks with the George Floyd tragedy. I mean, I've taken action, and the companies that I work with, that on whose boards I sit now, including the private equity firm on whose board I sit, all of us want to make change happen, and we're all actually trying to attempt that through various things. I'm working with women at Spelman College as an example, to try to bring them into the companies that I work with, on whose boards I sit. Many of my friends are marching in Black Lives Matter movement. This is a time for change, and I think that people are more open to it, and there's more discussion about it. And as a result, I think that we can affect and make a difference as we go forward. And, you know, we've done a lot in the last year or two around women on boards in particular. And I must tell you that it has been a very good opportunity for many of my friends who are executives, women executives who have amazing talents. But more has to be done, and I think that some of the things that have gone on over the last few months can make that change even more dramatic.
Thank you, Bethany, and thank you, Carolyn. I know you both have to go. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is for Nancy. We see that the numbers of women on nonprofit boards are better than corporate boards, but there's still a significant gap when we're looking at who is chairing those boards. Why is that, and how do we address it?
Yeah, so, you know, if I can add something to the conversation before I answer that question, well, I hear that there is a desire to increase diversity, but I think that sometimes there can be a lack in fully understanding how to recognize and appreciate that diversity. So I think that as we begin to talk about this, it has to be done with intentional and thoughtful integration. So, you know, one of the things that I've experienced is that sometimes there can be a disconnect between the female experience and the male perception. And certainly in my role in working with a variety of different boards, one of the things that I've learned is that great talent alone is not enough to create a well-functioning board. So I would encourage us to have, as we have these conversations, to understand that women tend to be most successful on boards and commissions when there are formal processes and cultures in place that will leverage their individual contributions as well as the board's collective intellect. And when it comes to nonprofit boards, and nonprofit specifically, I think it ties into the larger conversation, because typically when we are identifying nonprofit board chairs, we're looking for someone with the capacity to contribute to the organization's philanthropic engagement through increased board recruitment, through fundraising, or in our case, through advocacy. So by default, we look to corporate executives or other people who are in positions of leadership and influence. So if there continues to be a disproportionate representation of women in those positions, then that's going to be reflected on nonprofit boards as well, particularly as board chairs. So, I do think that with a concerted effort to uplift and support women, we will see a shift in those numbers, but I think it has to be done in conjunction with elevating women to executive and decision-making positions, and expanding opportunities for women to increase their network. There's a quote in the that I love by Ann Shepard, and it states that gender diversity in the boardroom isn't a pipeline problem, it's a network problem. And I do believe that. And I will add that in order to shift the dynamics, we can't think of gender diversity without applying an equity lens, like Roxanne mentioned, and that this is how we're going to effectively increase inclusivity and gender diversity, not just on our nonprofit boards, but on all of the region's boards and commissions.
Roxanne, did you want to add to that?
There was, Nancy said it perfectly. The other piece that I wanted to add too, when we are uplifting women into these leadership positions, we need to make sure that we're giving them the authority to make decisions, to be a part of the conversation, and to have that kind of influence. Because what I often see is women get promoted and then their voices aren't necessarily respected when they're in those positions. And so it's important that, it's not just a name or title only, that we really are encouraging that diversity, that inclusiveness, and that equitable conversation to take place.
Jessica, why do we see such a difference with the number of women represented on nonprofit boards compared to the corporate?
Yeah, so thank you for everything Nancy and Roxanne said was so great. I think there's a number of reasons. As I mentioned before, we have a sex segregated workforce. Women tend to be in quite different work environments. We obviously see this with COVID and how many women work in the health field compared to men, and so you have an overrepresentation. So it's partly that we have a larger sort of group of women who could then, come into these leadership roles. But as Roxanne just referenced, even in organizations and industries where we have a lot more women, even at the top, we tend not to see women in those key roles, right? So this is parallel both in business and in the nonprofit sector, where we have fewer women in the chairman roles. Women are only about 7% of Fortune 500 companies, and women of color only represent 4.6% of Fortune 500 board members. So we really, in both, in all of these parallels, we have, as you get to the highest level, you have fewer. But I think, again, you have more women working in the nonprofit sector coming to the forefront. I think there's also a little bit more intentionality in the nonprofit sphere around equity in terms of saying, let's try to bring in a fair playing field in certain groups. I think that's probably been ahead of the private sector in certain ways. What's interesting, though, in the private sector, what's really pushing, I think, a lot of decision making throughout is actually investors. And actually, I think the first partner mentioned BlackRock, and she mentioned Goldman Sachs. The investors are really encouraging this change in behavior. That's going to have a ripple effect not only in the private companies, publicly held companies, but also in the nonprofit space, because that's where the money comes from, right? It comes from a lot of the corporate grant making, the CSR, the corporate social responsibility into these spaces when you have more of a push for diversity at the top. And there's just, another thing I wanted to mention, the critical mass was talked about a little bit, as I shared in our findings. We also see this support from the CEO. If we have a female CEO and multiple women on the board, the CEO that's a woman does better. So there's something about that sort of community of women who sort of are identifying, seeing change, and seeing the needs that she has to be, you know, breaking and being successful at that top level. That's really powerful. So I think that's another piece. And one other piece of research I wanted to just share, we see globally also, women tend to be more focused on equity, inclusion, and diversity as a leader, right? We see that as a board member, that's something she's going to share more often. She's going to pay attention to the lack of what people of color on the board, to the lack of LGBTQ, you know, where are we missing? Where do we have deficiencies in sort of that lens? So I think that's really interesting that we tend to see women be more aware of that, that lack of inclusion.
Has that been your experience, Nancy, in the nonprofit world?
Yes, I mean, I do think that, you know, equity and diversity and inclusion aligns with a lot of our missions in nonprofit, and I do think there's a lot of truth to, you know, supporting a female CEO when there are more females on the board. I've certainly experienced it and seen it, and I do think that because there tends to be a little higher representation of female leadership in nonprofits, that also lends to the increase in female board members in nonprofits. But, you know, we still have some work to do in our sector as well.
I think another piece of this with the nonprofit boards, you mentioned the barriers, right? The financial contributions that are required, or the sort of level of expertise or influence you have maybe in your own organization, kind of keeps younger people out. And so we're really lacking there on the voices of younger people, I think on nonprofit boards, but also on government boards and commissions. I've noticed that myself. I serve on the San Diego City Library Commission, and we do have one younger member, but generally it's, you know, pretty middle-aged, you know. So what can government boards and commissions do, and what can nonprofit organizations do to kind of break down the barriers for some younger women and younger people to get involved in some of these boards? Maybe that's a good one for you, Dr. Kimani.
Sure. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were asking the question is what I've noticed within younger generations is they still want to be able to give their money, but they want to be able to see the return on where that money is going, even if it's a small amount. And the capacity, when you think about using the Kickstarter campaigns or GoFundMe or all of these different ways for people to get little bits of cash from a large group of people, that amount of money is moving in a really powerful, life-changing direction for whether it's for an organization or if it's funding for a particular person or a cause. And so people do definitely want to be able to give their money, but they want to have a bit more information about where that money is going, how it's going to be used, even if it's just $50 or $100. You know, people tend to want to give more monthly than a big lump sum. I mean, we don't see those kinds of large cash donations within younger generations that we have, because living in this world, particularly in California, is very expensive. But people do and will give $5, $10 monthly or biweekly or something to that effect. So I think one of the pieces for us to connect to is to try to capitalize on those smaller donations as one factor. The other piece that I want to bring forward that Nancy mentioned too about bringing women onto boards, particularly positions of leadership, is when you're thinking about those chair roles, that it isn't just about the fundraising. That is one aspect. It's about really being able to get out there and advocate for the cause. People want to know more about the cause. They don't want to just be asked for money. So what are the ways that we can advocate for what this organization is giving, who they're really serving? The more that that kind of information is out there, then people are gonna just give their money. It's not, you won't even have to get to the place of the ask, because they believe in the cause, they're motivated by it, and they want to be able to see the power of that donation.
Mm-hmm. Jessica, in your research, you talked to so many people, and what conclusions have you come to, shifting sort of our focus back to the corporate boards? What do we need to focus on with getting more women on corporate boards? Is it the network? Is it the training? Is it what combination? What needs to happen there?
I think it's twofold. When I talk about my work, I like to talk about the external structural barriers that are in systems, and we talk about this sort of internal challenges, or women feeling like they have the confidence to actually be in those roles. With the public company boards, it's really high level, right? In terms of the process, you can learn all about the process of getting onto a board. So becoming knowledgeable as a woman interested in becoming considered for a board position, that's a whole part of the process. How can we step in to help train that woman to feel comfortable? What do I expect? What do board members of corporations do? They're very high stakes, positions where they have fiduciary duties, and they're leading in cases, billion-dollar companies. So there's a piece around supporting the women to feel that she has the requisite understanding and support there. On the other side, though, and I think this is a place we see less work in the organizations trying to tackle this, but I would call this the demand side. So we don't have the companies helping them to recognize and open up the process of identifying that talent, being open to thinking of new people. For a long time, and thankfully this has changed for public corporate directors, companies would only look at a former CEO to be on their board. So if that's the case, you're talking about women, as I mentioned, Fortune 500 companies, 7% are women CEOs. You don't have very many. So really thinking more broadly about the competencies and the background to bring to those board positions. Again, COVID, I think, has accelerated this in a good way, opening companies up to saying where they have major blind spots. But then, so on that front, I would encourage, as the part of the chamber, to work with the business community. And I think every organization and every company is going to hear things differently. If they're focused on the bottom line, which every company should be, hey, we know that companies are financially more effective. They're making more money when there are more women there. So how do we talk about that? We can talk about innovation. We can talk about moving to new marketing places that we hadn't considered because we brought in this new leadership. So I think making sure that we're talking to the business community and encouraging them to recognize the research that's out there, to see why this should be a strategic advantage for them. They should see this as a competitive advantage to bring more women to their board roles. The private companies, though, I really have to say, it's really fascinating. Again, when I was blown away by the research. Having done this, I shouldn't be surprised, but because I've been doing this for so long, but I was even surprised. And so, what's really powerful, though, is there's many of those private companies become public, right? So they are going to have to pay attention to their board makeup. And so what's good about that here in California is, hey, let's look at those pre-IPO private companies that are looking to go public. Because of the mandate here in California, they have to have women on their board. And again, I hope, and I think Roxanne and Nancy have spoken to this so well, we hope they do it. We want them to do it for the right reasons too, not just, hey, this is a number I have to fill, this is a quota or whatever, a check the box. This is because this is going to make my company better. This is going to make my board more effective. And so I think we're moving in that direction. And I think this effort with all our talent can really help to promote that understanding.
From a training and coaching perspective, I mean, what should we focus on with both the women who are stepping forward and saying, I want to be on a corporate board, or I want to serve on a board and commission? And I think there's two pieces of the training. We need, they're training for the candidates, but also training, right, for the boards or the organizations that they're stepping into, right? Especially these corporate boards where there's only one woman or no women. Nancy and Roxanne, maybe you could speak to that, like what do we need to focus on there?
Nancy?
Okay, sure. I think the word has been mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's what we should go into this with is intentionality on both sides, and being intentional about the boards and commissions that we choose to serve on and dedicate our time to, but also on the corporation side or as also being very intentional about harnessing that individual strengths and really making it an environment that supports the strengths that women bring, because we do bring really individual and unique strengths. And so making it an environment where those are harnessed and celebrated and encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I would expand on that, that in order for women to want to participate, to want to be on these boards too, an organization, a board, or a commission has to first of all, learn and recognize their own blind spots. You know, where is there some implicit bias that is taking place, a bit of discrimination in the way that voices are currently being heard within the organization as well as on the board, and to be able to do some deeper work around recognizing and being conscious to when those bias, those assumptions and judgments can show up. Because if we're not able to recognize that, then we're not going to be able to get to a place where you will have that gender synergy or the intentionality to be able to have an inclusive environment that takes place. And oftentimes that work really starts within the individual. It's not just the organization as a whole, because, you know, organizations are a system that are made up of people, and people come in from their home life with their own particular ethics and value systems, their ways of being, their different identities. And so all of that impacts the way that they show up in an organization, as well as how they take up that organization's missions and values and put it into use. And so before we can even get to a place of going, yay, diversity, we want all of this, we have to recognize that we have some problems and own up to it and be conscious to it. And that's where some of the deeper work, some of the coaching can happen, and the harder conversations that need to take place. Because again, while we want more women and talent to be intentional on the boards and commissions, we also need it to be showing up within the organization. Otherwise, you know, there's not going to be a way for them to be in sync, for them to work together for a greater purpose.
Right. Anything you wanted to add to that, Jessica?
Well, I mean, I'm so excited to have Nancy and Roxanne's support as we actually build this, because as we are seeing, there's a lot of dimensions to this challenge, right? So being really clear about what we can do here and how we can help to foster that. I do want to kind of reemphasize some of the gaps and recommendations that came out, as I mentioned a little bit around the coalition building and amplification. What we tend not to see in other parts of the country trying to do this work is there's often a lot of siloedness. There's a lot of great training already happening here in San Diego. We already have organizations like UCSD and USD and the Athena and others that are thinking about this, and United Way we interviewed. But how do we then help them? And I mentioned the San Diego Partnership. All of these groups should know about what each other is doing, because there's places in which we can amplify and support each other, and then we can start to see where there's additional gaps happening, because maybe everyone's sort of focused on one piece of the puzzle and we're really missing another part of that. And I think that's a place where San Diego can really do that well. I was not joking when I can already feel the collaborative nature of our city, and that is neat for this effort to happen, where we can really amplify and more quickly get to where we want to be, instead of having kind of start from scratch. You know, we don't need to start from scratch. We have a lot of great basis of intention here, and of efforts. So on that note, on the training piece, you know, where do pieces come up? I think all of these 5 groups, there's really there's different challenges that will play out. As I mentioned, the public companies are really different from private companies, nonprofit boards. I think the commissions are a really exciting thing for all of us to think about. I mean, it's great you serve on a commission, Elizabeth. I think a lot of people, even myself, who worked in politics a long time, these are appointed commissions, but these are places where we can really sort of cut our chops, getting to know what's happening in politics, getting to know what's happening in policy making, what our community cares about, and really build that ability of sitting and serving on a board. I co-founded a nonprofit in DC a long time ago and have chaired the board for many years, and I think that nonprofit experience is helpful in different avenues, but recognizing the unique sort of attributes that private and public company boards are compared to other boards. I think that's important for us to really make sure women feel confident in understanding those, but really step into it. I mean, how many times do men just step in and say, I can do this, and they don't know everything. They don't know all the detail, right? I mean, we just need to step into these opportunities, because we have this incredible wealth of knowledge. I just want to say one thing, a big shout out to our friends up in Los Angeles. Betsy Berkemer-Credere runs 2020 Women on Boards. She does this great board training for women on public boards. I did this training with about 50 women And these backgrounds, everyone, women of all backgrounds, they were so stunning. I couldn't believe this. And none of them served on a public company board. I was like, there's the talent. You're right here in front of us. And these women, you know, should be considered seriously. So connecting that network with the opportunity and helping those companies pay attention to them, I think that's another place we can really serve the business community and the nonprofit community better.
Well, we have a question from our attendees about making those connections. Like what's the plan for us to make those connections? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the database, Jessica.
Yeah, so what I loved about the Chamber and SDG&E's support with this project is they really gave me some time to do a landscape to see where we were before we made all of the changes. Because if we walked in and just said, oh, this is what we need to do, we need to just train women and we're going to fix this problem, that wouldn't have been as insightful as doing a little bit more legwork. But what we had decided from the get-go, and I want to give a shout out to Mitch Mitchell. I don't know if he's on the phone with Sempra, but he had some really great ideas behind this, and the Chamber, which was to build this database. Meaning that we are going to be building over the summer a place in which kind of a place where women who are interested in serving in these different positions, different kinds of board opportunities, can share their CV, can share their background, share their LinkedIn profile. Everyone should have a great LinkedIn profile. And we're building that over the summer. So I don't have all the specifics of what we're going to ask, but that'll be a place for women to share their interests. And also for companies, organizations, and commissions who are looking for this talent to share their interest. I am looking for more talent, and I did hear that in my interviews. So the extent to which this database can help to align those networks is our intent. That will not be the end of the goal, though. And as we develop this will roll out. I think we need to provide more physical opportunities for people, although this is hard during COVID, right? Or maybe virtual opportunities for people to meet. But at the end of the day, it's like anything. This is all about relationships. The reason why, in part, there's multiple reasons, but why there's so few women on public company boards, a lot of times the network is looking within their own network. They're bringing in people that are connected to them, they know. So the way in which we can get into those networks and say, hey, listen, we have this incredible database of women who are ready to serve. That is actually what a lot of other groups I talked to around the state affinity groups, working with African Americans to bring more diversity, more Latinos. We really need to work on all of these dimensions. That's something they're also doing too, is literally, hey, we have the talent. These are things that we need you to consider. And then I think, again, I keep emphasizing this, but dismantling or understanding the process for each of these five, because what's neat is we're not just focused on one kind of board position. The process is different for each. And so the extent to which we can sync those two things up, I think that will be one of the big things we do. But we will be developing programming into next year. So I welcome people reach out to myself and Elizabeth as we build these partnerships here in San Diego. How do you want to be involved? Because we can co-create that. Nothing has been completely developed. And that's exciting, because then we can really develop it as the need is there.
That's great. Nancy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, as we talk about building coalitions and networks, again, I think that we need to ask ourselves the question, are these coalitions accessible to everyone? You named a few different groups that are training women to be on boards, but are they reaching into particularly communities of color and accessing the women, reaching out to the women who really need access to those groups? And so I think that's something that shouldn't get lost in the conversation. One of the statistics from the report that really stood out to me is the low representation of Latinas in board seats. And, so I encourage Latinas and really women of color to start identifying the boards and commissions that we want to be a part of. And I encourage all of us to really stop asking for a seat at the table and working together to really build our own tables.
That is great advice.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, just to give more texture to that, as Nancy mentioned, it's not in the report, but of the Fortune 1000 companies, only 1.1% are Latinas. that is really low. And so as we can see, women of color broadly, we have 20% women of all backgrounds, and then we shrink down. So we really have to pay attention to all of these elements. But as I mentioned, no one's tracking this data. Public companies are not required to report gender, race, ethnicity, anything. No one is required to report this information. They are only required in their filings to report who's on the board. Then we have to figure it out, you know, by hand as researchers.
Transparency is a huge issue here.
It's a huge issue.
A good starting point. Nancy, that was a great piece of advice. Roxanne, do you have any, what is like, you know, marching order for the women who are watching you today? What advice do you have?
I think take Nancy's advice, continue to build out your LinkedIn profile, capitalize on the people that you know, build out your network and ask for those introductions. And then use those introductions, reach out to companies, let them know that you're interested, and build that table, encourage other women around you to take part in it. I think the other marching orders for the organizations as a whole is to change the way that you are looking and your expectations. Expand what it is that you're looking for, because you want to have a diverse group that includes what those lived experiences are, how they're showing up, because all of those things impact our economic, our social, and our political issues that a lot of these organizations, the commissions, are facing. If you want to represent the community, then you have to have the community on your board and be on board with commissions.
That's great, thank you. I'm just going to quickly read a question, and I think I have a pretty quick answer. Do government boards and commissions have requirements that members be registered in the same party as the presiding mayor, county supervisor, etc.? Jessica, you've done research into this. In my own experience, I would say no, and I would counsel those who are interested to reach out to their city council members and also to the city and county websites and to the chamber website and enter your interest on our web form. And we can always help you with that. Jessica, anything to add to that point?
And on the county commissions, Kia Pollard, who I interviewed, who works for Chairman Cox, we had a great conversation. And really on the county commissions, which he was so greatly transparent about, is, hey, they're always looking for talent for people. And so it's really the staff of the supervisors, the county supervisors in the case of the county commissions, who are looking for talent. And so there is a really great website they have if you go to the county commissions and boards, where you can fill out that information. But as I already mentioned, we haven't developed all of those networks and connections. So that will be something we're going to be very intentional about. So providing those opportunities to understand that process better, how people are considered. And then again, the supervisor, whoever is nominated, they then make a decision on who then serves on those commissions. But I did see, even within the commissions where we had a higher percentage of women, for example, we didn't have as many women on planning commissions. And those are very powerful. It's much more male dominated when you get into the kind of particulars. Then you have, I thought was interesting, I mentioned this in the report, that the commission on the status of women and girls, which is very important when we talk about what the opportunities are, there weren't any men. I thought that would be important for men to have those, contributions. So thinking more specifically on where commissions, need our voices, I think that's an important piece too, to look in this particulars.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. It's time for us to close now. Thank you to our panelists, Jessica Grounds, Roxanne Kimani, Nancy Maldonado, Bethany Mayer, and Caroline Nguyen, for creating such a rich discussion today. We are so lucky to have you here in San Diego. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being with us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Jerry Sanders. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth and panelists, for an insightful conversation, and all of our attendees for joining us today. And there's been well over 200 of you who've been viewing this, and we hope we're going to have the call to action to start working with us on this issue. This is just the beginning, and as we've mentioned, there's much more to come from All Our Talent initiative in the coming months, and we need your support to do that. Please visit our website, sdchamber.org/allourtalent, and sign up to stay connected. You can also download the full report and share that with your networks, and we look forward to all of your involvement. Once again, thanks for joining us today.